Dono, looking at where Miami is from a revenue standpoint, again, it's one of the more valuable schools in the country, usually top 25, whether football is good or bad. And that power, that entity, if the Big Ten and the SEC do end up balking, the Big 12 is right there to pick it up and try to create that Power 3 conference. Again, we've established with Florida State and Clemson gone, when revenue doesn't make sense in the ACC anymore, I think Miami's valuable enough. They'll look for a new home elsewhere where they can get more money. The Big 12 will be that when those top two teams, the ACC, do finally depart. With that being said, all of the moaning and groaning aside, when you picture Miami as a Big 12 school, is there a path forward where that works?
I think there is a path forward, and I'll say it because being part of the SEC or the Big Ten doesn't automatically guarantee you success. Now, obviously, the revenue cut, at least in there. Now, remember, when they bring in more members, the revenue cut gets a little bit smaller until they renegotiate their TV deals. But even with a higher revenue cut, leaving the ACC for the Big Ten, and I can use a specific example on this, doesn't automatically elevate your athletic program. Like a few years ago, Maryland left the ACC for the Big Ten, and I don't feel like Maryland has really boosted their brand much more from one conference to the other. Like, it doesn't guarantee you any success being part of that. I think being embraced and being celebrated by your new conference is important. And I'm not saying that the SEC or Big Ten wouldn't do that for Miami, but if the Big Ten rolls out the red carpet and if they promote Miami in a proper way, I think Miami could find some success and actually have a good experience with that. And then, when you talk about why a school like Miami would be attractive for the Big 12, potentially, something that I know this does get talked about a lot, even when Miami's like in-game attendance may be inconsistent at times. Like when they're hot, the attendance is hot, the ticket prices are high. When they're not, it's the opposite. They always perform well on television, and it's a big media market. So there's not that many of those in college football. I mean, you have, Georgia Tech obviously has not been a very successful program for most of the recent years, but being in the Atlanta market is successful. One of the things that made UCLA and USC so attractive for the Big Ten was the Los Angeles market. There's not, major football in the New York City market, but that's a huge market. Miami is, I think, a top 12 market, and there's not that many of those big media markets, a lot of college towns around college football. So I think that's something that could make Miami attractive for the Big 12 as well.
It does seem like the Big Ten's focus is adding Clemson and Florida State. At least those have been the conversations that have been like what we've heard. And the SEC, it seems content. Greg Sankey looks he's much more of a visionary than I think most people take him for, as he looks toward how to create, and you've seen conversations leak recently, how to create this almost Power 2 scenario of a college football playoff only featuring the SEC and the Big Ten. With that, as Miami's not the focus, the Big 12 has them at the top of the wish list. Brett Yormark has them at the top of the wish list. Dono, I want to get kind of the pulse almost socially, right? To have a UCF there, to be playing a conference game against Utah or Colorado, a Texas Tech, a TCU, a West Virginia. It's not sexy when you say it out loud, but it's a very blue-collar conference that has one thing going for it right now, and it's stability, more so than most stability. Does that entice Miami on the whole?
There's a few matchups that you bring up that I think should entice Miami fans. I mean, people who really love football and know football, I think would appreciate matchups against Utah. I mean, it's just been such a consistent, well-coached program in recent years. Like the Utes have been a tough out for anybody, right? Definitely. I know that people who root for Miami, Florida State, and Florida, they talk down UCF a little bit when they made their championship rings after a non-championship. They've been a meme for a long time, but that's a program that's been on the rise for a long time. And there's also, at least in the short term, there's a lot of Miami tie-ins. A lot of players who have left Miami in the transfer portal have found homes at UCF. Just in this transfer cycle alone, former Miami defensive end Nigel Kelly transferred there. Former Miami backup quarterback Jakari Brown is now there. Former Miami signee Antoine Jackson is there. So there's a lot of, I don't know how long those guys are going to be there the next couple of years, but there are some tie-ins. There's a lot of connections there between those two programs. Now, a sexy matchup just based on who's the coach there right now, Deion Sanders. Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun playing Colorado for as long as Coach Prime stays there. And, you mentioned West Virginia, the old school Miami fans, of course, who go back to the Big East rivalry between Miami and WVU would appreciate that as well. So, again, it's not the type of matchups you would get in the SEC or the Big Ten, but I think there are some fun matchups to be had in the Big 12 and some old rivalries that can be renewed, and maybe you create more of a rivalry with a school like UCF.
I think it's a tough conversation. I know it is, because I've been in position before when I was in college, the team that I root for, when you just don't know the future of your conference and where things are going to go. And I'm sure there are Miami fans that see, again, Miami and the Big 12 in the same sentence and think that there's no way it's impossible. But when you got guys like Dennis Dodd releasing articles that say there's a kind of a break the glass scenario where Clemson and Florida State end up in the Big 12 and a Power 3 is truly solidified. When stuff like that's on the table, I think Miami to the Big 12 is certainly on the table. And that's kind of the thesis that I end on, is in realignment, whatever you think is going to happen usually doesn't happen, it seems. It's only what ESPN, Fox, the TV companies want to dole out and move their properties around for. Dono, what's the thesis to you when you think Miami in expansion moving forward?
I think ending the uncertainty is one of the most important things. Wherever you end up, obviously, again, the dream scenario would be to end up in the Power 2. But if it is a conference like the Big 12, and if Miami and other teams do wind up in the Big 12, it would be stronger than it currently is today. So that could be something to celebrate to a lesser extent. But ending the uncertain, like having to, for the fans who are deep into the weeds, who follow all this realignment, these hypotheticals every single day, to get out of that uncertainty. Whereas, okay, is my conference going to look this way in 2 months, 2 years? Is there still going to be a conference 2 years from now? To take that uncertainty away, I think would be a big thing. So I think the thesis there would be wherever Miami ends up, you make it your home and you go all in and you run with it. And, you keep investing what the administration is now investing in the program. They've really stepped it up over the past few years. Obviously people take their pot shots at Mario Cristobal and his in-game management, but the off-the-field stuff, recruiting, program building, he's doing work down in this area that I haven't seen done in a couple of decades, to be honest with you, the way that the recruiting is going down here. So if you can find stability somewhere, even if that's in the Big 12, you take it, you run with it, you try to keep rising this program up. I
wholeheartedly believe that Miami is an entity that is very valuable in college sports, and they will end up in a spot where they can benefit a conference. The reason I know that's the case is because ESPN is going to make sure that it happens. It's the TV networks that get these. Again, I call them properties because that's what they're treated as when you move them around across the landscape of college athletics. That is Alex Dono of Locked On Canes, Drake Toll with you from Locked On Big 12. Come back to our shows tomorrow to give you more on the transfer portal, NIL, expansion. There's a ton going on. No such things in offseason in college football or college basketball right now. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day right here on Locked On Canes and Locked On. Thanks for making them again your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.